Hi, I'm Becky Wade, and I thought that I would talk today about the process that I follow when I'm writing one of my novels. I'm endlessly interested in this topic because if you speak with authors, you'll find that every author uses a different method. And ultimately, the only method that's right, quote unquote right, is the one that works for that particular author. And I love that we have so many differences from one to the next. I'll be talking about my process, and it begins with imagining and inspiration. And so I take an initial inspiration, maybe I have just one idea, and I gradually then begin to build that one idea out. I spend quite a bit of time brainstorming and taking in a lot of movies and television and books and things that pertain to my idea. And over time, I begin to see the characters and the plot line start to emerge. At that time, I will often do research. And so, for example, I had this idea to write about a heroine who owned a chocolate shop in Sweet on You. And so one of the books that I read before I started writing, just to kind of gather knowledge and do research, was this one, Making Artisan Chocolates. And this book, I mean, just from this one picture, you can tell how hungry it would have the potential to make you. The pictures alone, but then when you read about all of the chocolate making, oh my goodness, this was very inspiring, and I actually referred to it quite often when I was writing the manuscript as well. I will also do character work at the outset before I begin writing the rough draft, and by character work, I am referring to a couple of things. One, character interviews. I have a series of very detailed questions that I ask every character that help me get to know them better. And those can be found on my website if you're a reader or a writer who's interested in seeing the list of questions that I ask my characters. And then I will also, secondly, I will do further research. I will often read a memoir written by a person who had a career similar to that of my character, or perhaps an experience similar to that of my character. So for example, when I was about to write about Jake Porter in A Love Like Ours, he was a veteran who had PTSD, and so I read a memoir by a veteran who had PTSD. And when I wrote Undeniably Yours, I read an entire book written by someone who was very familiar with the business of thoroughbred racing. And I read another book by a person who was a thoroughbred racehorse trainer. So anyway, it really helps to give me just some understanding and some context before I begin writing. Once I've got all of that figured out and I've done research about my characters' professions, and I've also done a lot of research about my plot idea, and I've looked at a lot of true life stories that can help sometimes spur ideas from my fictional story, then I begin writing the rough draft. And I do quite a bit of dictation at that phase. I like to get the pages down while I'm walking around my neighborhood with my dog. And then when I come home, I input them into my manuscript and I add to them and clean them up. And then the next day I do it all over again. And that part of the phase lasts somewhere between 4 and 5 months. And then once I get to the end of the rough draft, I print the whole thing out on paper. For me, there is some magical thing that happens when I read it for the first time in print. And I read it straight through from beginning to end, because up until that time, I have not allowed myself to go back and read or rework those very early chapters. I just make myself press forward to the end just to get it done. And then when I have this whole manuscript and I'm reading it for the first time from beginning to end, I get to have kind of an overview of the story the way that a reader does. And I get to very clearly see all the things that I need to fix. And usually at that phase, there are a tremendous number of things that are not working and that need to be fixed. And so then I roll up my sleeves and I do the hard work of rewriting. And that process takes me about 3 months. And that's the phase that I'm in actually right at the moment. It's my favorite phase, but it's also incredibly challenging because it's intricate work. And now, the thing that I was telling myself when I was writing the rough draft, which is it doesn't have to be good, just get it down, you know, figure it out later, write what your instincts are telling you to write now. I can no longer tell myself that when I get to the rewriting, because now it has to actually like come up in its technical value. Like it can't stay that lump of Play-Doh that it was when it was a rough draft. Now I have to actually build that lump of Play-Doh into something that someone might be interested in purchasing. And so that's what I'm doing during the rewriting phase. And often I am doing a lot of deleting. I'm doing a lot of moving scenes around from one place to another place in the manuscript. I'm doing a lot of writing of new scenes. And so very often, once I complete rewriting, the draft doesn't look all that much like it did when it was a rough draft. I mean, I do a tremendous amount of rewriting. It's not editing, it's rewriting. It's true rewriting. After I submit my book to the publisher, once I've rewritten it, I get their feedback from my editorial team, and I spend another month rewriting again, integrating their feedback and changing whatever needs to be changed, whatever things I may not have seen in my first rewrite, and I now have the objectivity to see, I will change at that point. And then I send it back to them and I edit the book 2 times before it goes to print. And at that time, I really am just making more minor changes with pen. So that's editing work. But up until that point, I've been doing intense rewriting. And that's it. By the time I edit it for the second time and sign my name to it and send it back in a UPS envelope, my job with the novel is complete. And that's always a moment of great satisfaction. And it's also a little bittersweet because I know that my part of that particular book is at an end. And sometimes when I'm finishing up a series, my part in that particular series or that particular family is also at an end. So there's a little bit of an element of goodbye, but overwhelmingly, I'm always just so grateful that I was able to shepherd another book through this long process, which starts with just one tiny idea of inspiration and ends almost a year later with a finished novel. That's my process.